Let's go. She not 10, she 11 when she in that denim. Boss B, doing G, she on the team. Oh, you do, me too. What you say, how you do?
The lake was frigid, and everyone immediately felt a bone-piercing chill as soon as they stepped in. Following behind Deke, Xavier dove down into the lake. Even the weakest among the crowd was at Glory Realm. At that level, holding one's breath for 20 to 30 minutes wasn't a problem at all. Even though Franklin's cultivation was still slightly lacking, Jim used his Gleam to form a protective layer around her and kept transfusing Gleam to her. As such, she was able to avoid drowning. Initially, with the light that shone through the surface of the lake, they could still see the situation before them. However, as they went deeper in, darkness began to envelop them. Prepared, Deke took out a few night illumination pearls and passed one to everyone. Under the gentle light, the underwater world appeared clearly before them. Due to the excessive frigidity of the water, there were no life forms in it. Swimming downward at around a depth of 200 to 250 feet, they finally saw the bottom of the lake. Corals of various different colors filled the area. It was impossible to speak underwater, so Deke communicated by gesturing to the crowd. He adeptly maneuvered around the coral-filled ground and advanced. Before long, a cliff appeared before them. The surface of the cliff was smooth, and it didn't seem as though there was anything unique about it. Flicking his wrist, Deke took out a stone plate, and after feeling about the wall for a moment, he found a precise aperture and inserted the stone plate into it. A mechanism was activated. The cliff suddenly came to life and started opening up. What exquisite craftsmanship, Xavier thought as his eyes lit up. Even though it was a mechanism created out of rock, there wasn't even the slightest mark on its surface to betray its identity. It might have been less intricate than the Celestial Designer mechanical container, but its craftsmanship was still far superior compared to the other artifacts he had seen before. It seemed like the craftsman who had built this Soul Oracle tomb was an expert. Even at worst, he must have at least reached 9th level. Legend had it that 9th level craftsmen were capable of creating machinery and puppets that even transcendent mortal experts would be unable to see through. From the looks of it, the legend was indeed true. The opening of the cliff face revealed an entrance. Deke then took the lead and stepped in. There were several unique mechanisms to keep out water inside the cavern. As the crowd stepped in, they immediately realized that the area was well ventilated. Once everyone was inside, the cliff face automatically closed by itself.
This is the passageway to the Soul Oracle tomb. At the very end is the tomb itself.
Okay, Xavier nodded. The crowd looked at their surroundings in interest. This was a narrow passageway. Under the illumination from the night illumination pearls, the group saw all kinds of inscriptions on the surface of the walls. Most of them were regarding the various rituals that Soul Oracles conducted. A sinister air loomed in the area.
We should proceed slowly. There are a lot of fearsome traps placed along the passageway.
Familiar with the environment within the ancient tomb, Deke reached forward and 2 child-sized puppets appeared before him. He had probably prepared these puppets specially for this occasion. Placing 2 spirit stones into them, the puppets headed straight down the passageway. Barely after the first puppet took 3 steps, a strong gust of wind blew, and with a crisp sound, the puppet burst into smithereens. Everyone narrowed their eyes. This puppet was crafted using a unique material known for its sturdiness. Even a cultivator of Jim's caliber would find it hard to smash it in a single blow. And yet, some unknown mechanism before them had caused it to be reduced to smithereens in just a moment. If not for Deke warning everyone swiftly, it could have been the fate of one of them. In an instant, cold sweat immediately drenched the backs of everyone there. As expected of one of the most feared occupations in the ancient era, the Soul Oracle tomb was indeed extraordinary. If Master Xavier hadn't seen through Deke's possession and allowed the Soul Oracle to guide them through this area, their entire group would more than likely have been wiped out before even reaching the Soul Oracle tomb. While everyone was still overwhelmed with shock, the second puppet advanced forward. However, barely after a few steps, just like the first puppet, it was smashed to smithereens as well.
Within 5 steps, there are 2 death traps. I'll go on first and mark out the spot where you all should step. Make sure to follow it closely, otherwise I'll be unable to guarantee your safety.
Deke instructed gravely. Yes. Knowing the importance of this issue, everyone nodded their heads. Deke proceeded forward carefully. However, as soon as he stepped forward, the whistling of the wind sounded, and it shot past an area not too far away from him. From the looks of it, if one were to be struck by it, one wouldn't be too far from death even if one managed to survive the attack. However, with a puppet to test out the path, they would be able to avoid the traps. Looking at the treacherous passageway, Hallmaster Sam asked, "Given how danger is lying in wait throughout the passageway, could this be a slaughter formation?" If that was the case, given Master Xavier's understanding of formations, they would be able to break it and advance safely through. It isn't. Xavier shook his head. If it was a formation, he would have surely felt a disturbance in the spiritual energy in the air. But there clearly was none. After a moment of contemplation, Xavier finished his analysis. The greatest fear of the Soul Oracles aren't humans, but rather soul-devouring ants, and formations are ineffective on those creatures. Thus, it's unlikely for a Soul Oracle to incorporate a formation into their defensive mechanisms. If I'm not mistaken, these are mechanical traps. The soul-devouring ants were the nemesis of Soul Oracles, so naturally, they had to prepare some traps to protect themselves. Soul-devouring ants were capable of consuming spiritual energy contained within a formation and forcefully halting it. Thus, mechanical traps were preferred over formations. The crowd nodded in agreement. "But if all of those are mechanical traps, this will prove to be troublesome. None of us here are adept in this field. If only we had a celestial designer here, we'd really be spared a lot of trouble." Hallmaster Sam frowned. "Celestial designer?" Roach and the others looked over. Xavier had never mentioned such an occupation, so they had never heard of it. "Indeed. Celestial designer, also known as a master mechanic, is an occupation of the lower 9 paths. They are skilled in designing these mechanical systems. Even though their creations might seem humble on the surface, they usually incorporate sword power and battle techniques that could overpower even experts when they're activated." Hallmaster Sam explained. "This occupation also has its own organization, the Celestial Designer Institute. They specialize in designing the world's most exquisite weapons and traps. However, I've only read about this occupation in books. There isn't a branch in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance, and it's said that only an Empire of Balinrobe's tier is qualified to build a branch." Xavier nodded his head as a frown slowly appeared on his forehead. The artifacts designed by celestial designers are extremely complex and exquisite. It, indeed, would be difficult to bypass these traps without understanding the logic behind them. He had seen the complexity of the Celestial Designer mechanical container himself. If not for the Library of Heaven's path, it would have been impossible for him to open it. Even a single box could be designed quite intricately. If a person of that occupation had assisted with the design of the traps in this passageway, the dangers that lurked would be unimaginable. Just as Xavier was deep in thought, he heard the sound of a sharp knife tearing through flesh. Lifting his gaze, he saw Deke hurriedly retreating with a reddened face. His arm seemed to have been sliced by something and was bleeding profusely. "Are you all right?" Jim and the others hurried forward to help him stop the bleeding.
"I'm all right."
Deke shook his head.
"The traps in this passageway seem to have become even more complicated than before."
"Even more complicated? How long is this passageway? How long did it take you to reach the end?" Xavier asked.
"It is around 1,000 feet long. The previous time I was here, I advanced bit by bit, using the puppets, and it took me around 4 days to get to the other end."
Deke frowned.
"However, it seems like these traps change every single time one enters. My previous experience clearing the traps is completely useless now."
4 days? Xavier was speechless. To travel 1,000 feet in 4 days? This passageway was indeed difficult.
"Indeed, but there's no other way around it. The sword power contained within the traps possessed the might of at least Transcendent Mortal Level 4 Pinnacle. If one were to accidentally come into contact with it, they would be torn in half in an instant."
Deke shook his head. "Transcendent Mortal Level 4 Pinnacle sword power?" The crowd was astonished. When they saw the puppet being reduced to smithereens previously, they already had an idea that the sword power emanated in the traps was fearsome. Even so, they didn't expect it to be so powerful. Even a Transcendent Mortal Level 4 Pinnacle expert would find it difficult to survive after being struck by such a powerful sword power. Not to mention, it would be difficult for them to dodge the attacks in such a narrow passageway.
"Do we really have no other choice other than to advance bit by bit?"
Franklin frowned.
"Well, that's right. The trap mechanisms left behind by celestial designers are incomparably profound, and they are ever-changing. If one doesn't know the pattern behind the changes, it'll be difficult to clear the traps."
Deke shook his head. It won't work even if we were to destroy the mechanical system in this passageway? Xavier asked with a frown. Even formations, an intangible existence, could be stopped with a kick. If they could find the switch to the traps or the center of the system's operation, shouldn't it be possible to shut down the traps?
Destroy?
Deke smiled bitterly.
How could it be that easy? Just like a water wheel, the artifacts left behind by celestial designers are constantly on the move. Even if one had the blueprint on hand, if one doesn't comprehend the logic behind it, it'll be futile. If its designs could be overcome so easily, it wouldn't be such a feared occupation.
Mechanical systems and formations were similar in the sense that even if an amateur were to have a blueprint in hand, if they couldn't understand the workings of the system, they would still be unable to decipher it. After all, mechanical systems were built to be continuously on the move. If one didn't understand the slightest bit of this occupation, they would be unable to get out alive, let alone destroy it. Hallmaster Sam nodded in agreement.
Indeed, this is the reason why celestial designers are feared. They are capable of incorporating mechanical systems into artifacts, thus crafting tools capable of slaughtering experts easily. Furthermore, these artifacts don't need to be powered by spirit stones. If I'm not mistaken, the energy required for powering these traps comes from the waterfall above. As such, unlike formations, compasses won't work. If one doesn't understand the logic behind the traps, one would never be able to overcome them.
Compasses were capable of determining the flow of spiritual energy to detect the weak points of a formation. However, mechanical traps weren't powered by spiritual energy. Rather, they were powered by kinetic energy. How were they supposed to decipher these traps? Hearing the analyses of the duo, the complexion of the group turned gloomy. The excitement from before had vanished altogether. Seeing that the morale was down, Xavier shook his head and said, "Even though compasses won't work, it doesn't mean that there are no other methods of deciphering the traps. Let me give it a try." After which, Xavier smiled faintly and gently touched the floor of the passageway with his palm. Seeing that Xavier was touching the ground instead of studying the various logics governing the traps in the passageway, Deke felt faint-headed. Did he really think that he could analyze the entire mechanical system just by touching the ground? The traps designed by celestial designers were as complex and intricate as formations. There were innumerable types of mechanical systems, and even for systems of the same type, there were countless variations. Not to mention, the design of the system would also affect its operation as well. Even a real celestial designer would have to take a long time analyzing the various properties of the mechanical system before being able to decipher it. No matter how skilled he was in the other occupations, it was impossible for him to apply the logic from those occupations into this field. Seeing that the morale was down, Deke consoled with a smile.
"Oh, there's no need to panic. Allow me to rest for a moment first. After that, I'll continue testing out the traps with my puppets. Anyway, the one thing we aren't lacking is time. I've also brought sufficient water and rations, so there's no need to worry."
In truth, his real occupation was a tomb raider, and he had already traversed such treacherous places innumerable times. He was used to it. However, the others were different. Having never encountered such a fearsome trap, it was natural for them to feel apprehensive. Jim nodded.
"There's no way around it. We don't understand such traps at all, so we'll be depending on you then." "Oh, don't worry. Even though the complexity of the trap has increased, as long as I have sufficient time, I'm confident that I can still make it to the other end. You'll just have to follow behind me."
Deke nodded. Most experts or wealthy merchants would opt to hire a celestial designer to design their tombs for them, so he had already faced off with such traps many times throughout the years. Even though the trap had become more complicated, he didn't think it would be a problem for him. Confident, Deke was just about to make preparations for another attempt when he saw that Master Xavier, who was done touching the ground, had stood up. The latter stretched his back before walking into the passageway. Deke immediately narrowed his eyes in fear.
"Master Xavier!"
Despite having tested the area with his puppet beforehand, he was still nearly torn in half by the sword power. Wasn't it suicidal to be charging in so recklessly? Panicking, Deke was just about to pull Master Xavier out when the young man suddenly lifted his leg and kicked at the wall beside him. An intense buzzing sound echoed throughout the cavern, and the crowd felt the ground beneath them shake. "All right, the traps have been disabled." After which, the calm voice of the young man echoed. Before the crowd could react, he began walking in widened strides.
The traps have been disabled?"
Seeing how nothing was triggered despite Xavier's casual movements, Deke's expression made his frenzy apparent. What was going on? He had just tried it out for himself, and the trap in the passageway was clearly much stronger and more complex than before. Even a person like him, who often hung out by tombs, would find it hard to clear the entire passageway without half a month of effort. Yet, the other party managed to do it with a single kick? Deke was on the verge of going mad. He turned around to look at the crowd, only to see the others staring at Xavier in bewilderment.
Hey, go on.
Deke felt stifled. However, given how Master Xavier was capable of even dealing with possession, it wasn't entirely impossible for him to have comprehended the various skills of celestial designers as well. Consoling himself like that, he advanced through the passageway. As expected, the traps in the passageway were truly disabled. Nothing was triggered as the group walked by. Soon, reaching the very end, a vast hall appeared before them. Upon seeing the hall, Deke said with a grim expression,
Previously, I was possessed as soon as I reached this point, so I didn't dare go any farther.
Xavier scanned the hall. Possessing a length and width of around 70 to 100 feet wide, it was reminiscent of an underground palace. At the very center of the hall were 4 huge ashen green coffins. It was impossible to determine what material the coffins were made of, but they looked extremely heavy. Eye of Insight. Instead of rushing in, Xavier raised his eyebrows and scanned the room once more. A moment later, he frowned. He found that he couldn't peer into the contents of the coffins. More than likely, they were a creation beyond that of his current cultivation realm. I wonder if I can get any detail on the room from the ground. Even though the Eye of Insight was unable to provide him any useful details, Xavier didn't panic. Instead, he bent down and touched the ground. Previously, recalling how he'd opened the Celestial Designer mechanical container, Xavier thought that since the traps operated by a mechanical system as well, they should have a flaw. Thus, he gave it a try, and to his delight, it really worked. The Library of Heaven's Path immediately reflected the names and flaws of the traps. After looking through, Xavier came to a realization. These traps were actually similar to formations. They had a death and life gate as well. Otherwise, how was anyone supposed to bypass them? Not only that, but there was also a core as well. As long as one found the center of operations, no matter how powerful a trap was, it could be made redundant. After all, without energy, no matter how powerful a machine was, it would be useless. This was the reason why Xavier could stop the entire mechanical system with a kick and lead everyone in. A book appeared in Xavier's mind. Green Ash Rock. Naturally formed in the depths of the ground, it is resilient. With just a brief glance, Xavier nearly cried. He thought that, even though the Eye of Insight was ineffective, he should be able to find out something regarding the coffin or the hall via the Library of Heaven's Path. Never in his dreams did he expect an analysis of the rock he had just touched to appear instead. Dismal, Xavier soon understood what was going on. The passageway constitutes the entirety of the mechanical system. That's why the information regarding the traps was reflected when I touched it. On the other hand, this is just a normal tile, so it reflects exactly what I touched. This is similar to the case when I touched the bookshelf. In the past, when Xavier attempted to gather all of the books in a single go by touching just the bookshelf, a similar occurrence happened. It seemed like the Library of Heaven's Path classified matters by an entirety. Otherwise, it would only reflect what Xavier came into direct physical contact with. But thinking about it, if he were able to know the condition of the entire continent just by touching the floor, that would be a little ridiculous. Seeing the serious expression on Master Xavier's face, Deke took the lead and explained,
There's no danger here. We can enter the hall.
When he stepped into the hall, nothing particular occurred. Thus, the group behind followed suit. Walking up to the coffin, Deke pointed and spoke anxiously.
These are the coffins housing the soulless metal humanoids. The one that I took came from here.
In the past, it was precisely when he had opened the coffin and was about to take away the soulless metal humanoid that he became possessed. As such, he already had trauma regarding the matter, and thus he didn't dare step forward. Nodding his head, Xavier walked forward. Let me take a look. As expected, one of the 4 coffins was open, and its interior was completely empty. He touched the empty coffin. A book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Grade 7 metal coffin. It's used as a container to house a soulless metal humanoid, and it won't decompose over time. Flaw number 1, it cannot be used to house a normal corpse. After reading through the details, Xavier was perplexed. Grade 7 metal coffin? Based on the description in the Library of Heaven's Path, this coffin should only have been used to store soulless metal humanoids. It shouldn't have contained any souls at all. If so, why would Deke have been possessed? Thus, he turned to an unopened coffin and touched it. It was also a grade 7 metal coffin, and its purpose was the same as well, storing a soulless metal humanoid. There wasn't much of a difference from the first one. Xavier went on to touch the others, and they reflected the same conclusion as well. Knowing that they were containers for soulless metal humanoids, Xavier swiftly lost interest. The purpose of his journey was to obtain the inheritance of the soul oracles. The soulless metal humanoids didn't mean much to him. But, in the end, these items were of great value. Previously, Xavier had managed to sell it for 20,000 spirit stones. Even though he didn't need it, he could still earn substantial wealth from their sales. Seeing Master Xavier touch all 4 of the coffins, Deke asked anxiously,
Master Xavier, he was possessed here. Should we open the other coffins?
The others were also awaiting Xavier's decision. Don't open them. Even though there were no problems reflected in the books, Xavier couldn't guarantee that no mishap would occur when the coffins were opened. It was better to proceed carefully. Put the coffins directly into the storage ring. We'll open them after we get out, Xavier said after a moment of contemplation.
All right.
Roach had been waiting for these words. He hurried forward, stretched out his hand, and swept the 4 giant coffins into his storage ring.
These belong to the young master. No matter who you are, don't even dream of laying your hands on them.
Seeing how shameless Roach was behaving, Xavier's face reddened. He turned around and issued some instructions before proceeding ahead. You all wait here first. I'll look around the area. The hall had an eerie appearance, and it felt desolate. The walls were all made of the tough green ash rocks, and it seemed like the builder really put a lot of effort into the construction of the hall. Not only did he excavate the entire area, but he even used the toughest material to reinforce its structure, ensuring its long-term durability. Touching the walls around the room, Xavier didn't find any trap. Thus, he advanced forward. The hall was linked to another narrow passageway. Walking up to it, he bent down and touched the ground. A book appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. It's just an ordinary passageway? The book recorded the details of the floor material reflected in the book, thus proving that there weren't any mechanical traps inside. Heaving a sigh of relief, Xavier soon came to a realization. Such traps were expensive. It was normal for traps to be laid at the entrance for fear of invaders, but setting them up in the interior seemed a little ridiculous. Since the purpose of those traps was to prevent anyone from entering the tomb at all, it would make more sense to spend the money on reinforcing the traps at the entrance. He turned around and shouted, "There's no danger here! Come over!" The group hurried over. Xavier thus led the way forward. The passageway wasn't very long, extending for only a distance of 30 feet or so. At the end, another vast hall appeared before them. It was much larger than the one before.
Based on what I know, the first chamber is for the protectors of the Soul Oracle, the soulless metal humanoids, while the second chamber is the main chamber prepared for the Soul Oracle himself. This should be where the souls of the Soul Oracles lie,
Deke said, his voice shaking. You mean that we'll find the souls of the Soul Oracles here? Xavier asked. Deke nodded.
Since this is the main chamber, you believe so.
Upon hearing the other party's confirmation, Xavier raised his head, and with a glance, a deep frown suddenly appeared on his face. With this? Oh, what is going on? Instead of a hall, what appeared before them was a field of flora and fauna. A refreshing fragrance tickled their nose, and they saw white clouds floating in the skies. It was as though they had returned to the mountains.
Could this be an illusion formation?
Hallmaster Sam and the others were taken aback. How could plants be growing in an underground chamber? Not to mention white clouds and blue skies. Clearly, it was an illusion formation. This isn't a formation. Xavier shook his head. As a formation master, he would surely be able to tell if it was one. However, there wasn't the slightest disturbance in the spiritual energy before him, and the sight before him felt incomparably real. It was as though one was traversing through space. It felt indescribably bizarre.
Is this a mechanical trap? No, that can't be. Mechanical traps aren't capable of producing such effects.
In the end, mechanical traps operated based on logic. They weren't capable of producing these flora, fauna, and flowing water before them.
Let me test the situation out with a puppet.
Perplexed, Deke flicked his wrist and a puppet appeared. Then the puppet slowly walked toward the field at the end of the passageway. As soon as it stepped out of the passageway, it immediately disappeared without a trace.
What happened?
Everyone leaped back in shock. How could the puppet suddenly disappear all of a sudden? Even if a mechanical trap was activated, at least the fragments of the puppet should remain. To disappear as soon as it walked toward the end of the passageway? This was way too bizarre.
Could this be a teleportation formation?
Hallmaster Sam's throat went dry. Everyone turned to look at him doubtfully.
The teleportation formation of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance is only capable of transferring words and information, and they are known as communication walls.
Hallmaster Sam said with a trembling voice,
It's said that at grade 6, teleportation formations will gain the ability to transfer material objects such as food, money, equipment, and even artifacts. At grade 8, even life forms can be transported. In other words, even a human can leap through space.
Transporting a human? The crowd was astonished. Xavier also widened his eyes in shock. As a 4-star formation master, he had a deeper understanding of formations than Hallmaster Sam. He thought that transporting information should already be the limit. To think that formations would be able to transport even a human. How deep of an understanding of space must one possess to be capable of setting up a formation capable of transporting humans? Given how the puppet abruptly disappeared, could this really be a formation of that level? If so, it was expected that they couldn't see or feel the puppet anymore. As an upper 9 paths occupation, formation masters had a high requisite on one's cultivation. If one's cultivation didn't reach the required level, one would be disallowed from studying more profound knowledge. It was just like how even though Xavier could inscribe a grade 5 formation plate, he was only considered a quasi 4-star formation master. A person capable of setting up a grade 8 formation possessed cultivation beyond that of a transcendent mortal. To be able to get such a figure to set up a formation for him, how powerful must the owner of the tomb be? Since Xavier could come to this conclusion, the others realized the same as well. Their faces immediately paled. If it were just a transcendent mortal level 3 or level 4 soul oracle, they would still maintain a certain degree of self-preservation means even if they were possessed. However, if the opponent they met were beyond that level, they wouldn't stand a chance at all.
Master Xavier, do we enter?
The crowd turned to look at Xavier. Xavier fell into a deep contemplation. If his conjecture was right, proceeding ahead would definitely put them in grave danger. He wasn't confident of holding his ground even with the Heaven's Path gleam. It could be said that a certain doom awaited them if they were to proceed forward. But if they backed down now, how much longer would it take for Lars to recover? For me, he was willing to even risk his life. What do I have to fear? Recalling how that young man stepped in front of him calmly to protect him, determination gleamed in Xavier's eyes. Lars was willing to give up his life for him. As the other party's senior, if he were to back down in the face of danger, what rights did he have to be the other party's teacher? Flinging his hands back, Xavier instructed, "You all wait here. I'll go in alone. If I don't return in 4 hours, I'll have to trouble Hallmaster Sam and young Master Franklin to help my students in Roach get out." "Teacher, I'm not leaving. I want to follow you." Sarah stepped forward.
We share the same thoughts. We'll follow you no matter where you go.
Alan and the others declared resolutely. If not for Mr. Matthews, they would still be ordinary students in the Olmec Kingdom. However, at this moment, every single one of them was a Glory Realm expert, each possessing the strength to lift a mountain. Since their teacher was willing to put himself in danger to save Lars, how could they, as his students, back down? Xavier felt a surge of warmth. However, the situation before him was too bizarre. It was too dangerous to bring them over. After a moment of hesitation, Xavier shook his head and his complexion darkened. "Are you all going to disobey my orders? Stay here." "Teacher, we implore you not to chase us away. How can we possibly watch by the side as you put yourself into danger? Even if we were to survive this ordeal, we'd definitely be plagued by guilt in the future." Sarah spoke resolutely. "Teacher, please don't chase us away. Even if it means disobeying your words, I'll go with you," Rose said. She was usually the most indecisive of the group, yet at this moment, the determination in her eyes was unwavering. Knowing that his students couldn't simply watch on by the side as he ventured through danger, Xavier nodded his head after a long moment of contemplation. "Since you have all made up your minds, let's go together then." Watching this sight, Franklin and the others felt touched. "The teacher for the students, and the students for the teacher. This is what a true relationship between a teacher and student should be." Previously, they had wondered why a person of Master Xavier's capability would bring around a bunch of young and weak students with him. However, at this moment, they realized that the relationship between a teacher and student transcended far beyond the impartation of knowledge. It was this self-sacrificial spirit that made the relationship between the two so noble. At that moment, a powerful aura suddenly descended from the skies. A unique energy began gathering in the world. It was neither spiritual energy nor origin energy, but with a single whiff, one could feel their analytical ability growing stronger and their thought process becoming clearer. This energy swiftly gathered around Xavier like a torrent, refining his presence and disposition. Narrowing her eyes, Franklin suddenly thought of something and her lips trembled in disbelief. "It's Celestial Master Teacher." Jim was also taken aback. "Celestial Master Teacher? How is that possible?" Celestial Master Teacher meant that even the heavens were acknowledging one's identity as a Master Teacher. Even if one didn't undergo the various examinations of the Master Teachers, one could still be acknowledged by the masses. Despite the continent's long history, only Keith Cole had ever succeeded in being acknowledged by the heavens. To think that this Master Xavier would manage to achieve the same as well. Hallmaster Sam's face flushed red.
Indeed, he really is a Celestial Master Teacher. Furthermore, He doesn't seem to just be a 2-star.
As the head of the only appraiser hall in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance and a 4-star pinnacle appraiser, he had met many master teachers. However, he had never heard of a single one being acknowledged by the heavens. The other party had said that he was a 2-star master teacher, so even if the heavens were to acknowledge him, he should only be a 3-star celestial master teacher at best. However, the overwhelming energy before him actually made him feel like submitting to the other party. Without a doubt, the other party wasn't just a 2-star or 3-star master teacher. However, as for his exact rank, Hallmaster Sam wasn't a master teacher, and he had never seen a celestial master teacher before, so he couldn't make a clear gauge. But regardless of his rank, to be acknowledged by the heavens was sufficient to send a ripple of shock through the world. This, contrary to the shock the others were going through, Xavier was a little dumbstruck. Previously, when he agreed to Sarah and the others' request, he actually wasn't too keen on doing so. However, considering that his students would never grow up if he were to protect them tightly beneath his wings, he decided to let go. It was just like a seedling. If one were to shield it from rain and soil, it would never grow tall. Thus, he reluctantly agreed to it. However, he didn't expect this to induce another Celestial Master Teacher acknowledgement. He had undergone such a situation before, so even though the inflow of energy made him a little dizzy, he knew this was a good chance to raise his strength. Thus, without any hesitation, he immediately sat down on the ground and focused his attention on absorbing the unique energy shrouding him. With the inflow of this strength, his soul depth raised swiftly, and his thought process gradually became swifter and clearer. Meanwhile, a meeting was taking place in the Myriad Kingdom Alliance's Master Teacher Pavilion. We are the hosts for the Master Teacher Tournament this time around. Make some preparations. We have to at least get a good placing. Seated at the center seat, Pavilion Master Pete surveyed the group before him. Those within the room were all the elders of the Master Teacher Pavilion. Master Jamie and Master Angus were also within the group. The location for the Master Teacher Tournament wasn't fixed. The 27 powers would take turns hosting the event, and it only happened that Myriad Kingdom City would be playing host this time around. This time, they were going to be battling on their home ground. It would truly be embarrassing if their results were as poor as before. Yes, the crowd nodded their heads. Pavilion Master Pete continued. This time, our elders have nominated a total of 6 candidates. I have looked through the information you have all submitted, and they are all indeed young talents. However, there are only 2 slots for this tournament, so a round of selection will have to be conducted. However, before he could finish his words, his body suddenly froze. The other elders also noticed something, and they narrowed their eyes. They quickly turned their sights toward a single direction. After a long period of time, Pavilion Master Pete finally managed to utter with a hoarse voice, "Trembling of myriad tokens. Harmony of the chimes? This is the acknowledgement of a celestial master teacher?" The faces of the elders paled, and they began muttering to themselves. Even though it's an acknowledgement of celestial master teacher, and it has occurred in our guild, given how the remarkable geniuses of the other powers are gathered in Myriad Kingdom City at the moment, there's a possibility that one of them might be the one who triggered it. Indeed, if they were to be acknowledged by the heavens in Myriad Kingdom City, the phenomenon would appear in our guild. Hurry up and find out which of the geniuses are in the city at the moment. It seems like the champion of this tournament will surely be that person. Celestial Master Teacher was an existence acknowledged by the heavens itself. Of the entire continent, only Keith Cole had managed to achieve this feat. Regardless of which power the Celestial Master Teacher came from, there was no doubt that they would be the champion in the Master Teacher Tournament. Could it be him? Different from the reactions of the other elders, Master Jamie and Master Angus glanced at one another, and a figure suddenly appeared in their minds. But soon they shook their heads. He had just completed a 2-star Master Teacher examination, and he hadn't even reached the Glory Realm yet. How could he possibly be acknowledged by the heavens? Thus, it couldn't be him.
Let's go. She know 10, she 11 when she in that denim. Boss B, even G, she on 19.